From the elite to high class, to middle class, to low class, to the poverty class. Whiteness drives around in class. Whiteness drives around in race relations. Race is pseudoscience. Race is made up. It's not real, but whiteness drives around in it through how different races interact with each other. Whiteness drives around in that. Very interesting. So whiteness drives around between black and white, brown and white, yellow and white, red and white, whatever color, whatever group. Whiteness drives around in that. Sexual orientation. LGBTQIA+. Does whiteness drive around in LGBTQIA+ community? Does whiteness drive around there? In the lesbian community, is whiteness driving around? In the gay community, is whiteness driving around? In the bisexual community, is whiteness driving around? Where is whiteness in queer? Whiteness is driving around possibly in the LGBTQ community. We know for sure that whiteness drives around in the heterosexual community, right? All day long. And it says, etc. So that's just we're just recapping. We're just going over what I'm just going over what we, me and you, the audience, and myself went over last class. Okay, here's another note. In the 21st century world that we are supposed to be living in, where racism and discrimination are frowned upon, why is there still a permanence, a continuity, and a focus on almost all Caucasian casts in the film industry? That's a question. Here's another question. What is it about Hollywood that still lacks diversity? Here's another question. Is it the still perpetuating white privilege of society that elevates Caucasian opportunities and diminishes that of other ethnicities? Based upon the working definition of Cafe Wish podcast, which comes from research that was done by other doctors and students who came together to create what whiteness is, Cafe Wish is adopting that definition, that working definition. So to answer some of these questions, and maybe you can help me answer some of these questions as well, let's be interactive here. Maybe, just maybe, this definition of whiteness could possibly give some nuance or maybe answer some questions. Whiteness is a hegemonic system that perpetuates certain dominant ideologies about who receives power and privilege. Whiteness maintains itself in cultures through power dynamics within language, religion, class, race relations, and sexual orientation. Here's another note before we move on, actually getting into the class. Here's another note. This is an excerpt from chapter 5 of a book. This chapter is entitled Whiteness, Vampires, and Humanity in Contemporary Film and Television. Ewan Kirkland. And this is what Ewan Kirkland had to say about a study that was conducted in 1997 by Richard Dyer. The study was entitled White. Here's what Ewan Kirkland had to say. White identity is a construction which has its own specific qualities, characteristics, narratives, mythology, histories, interpretation, whitewash of history, and cultures. It is also an aspect of the white disposition to see none of these as in any way expressive of a subjective white identity, but rather typical of humanity in general. Through this sense of particularity, whiteness presents itself as the default point zero, which all other groups are measured as deviating from an unraced model or human normality. Let me read that again because I kind of read that a little slowly. White identity is a construction which has its own specific qualities, characteristics, narratives, histories, and cultures. It is also an aspect of white disposition to see none of these as in any way expressive of a subjective white identity, but rather typical of humanity in general. Through this sense of non-particularity, whiteness presents itself as the default point zero against which all other groups are measured as deviating from an unraised model of human normality. In other words, the corporate look for whiteness in film, or the corporate look of film as such, in Hollywood, which is in America, and what appears to be globally, is either white phenotypes, white folks, or light, bright, almost white looking white folks, or those people groups who resemble the phenotypes of white people. So what does that look like? How does that show up in the real world? Well, in Asia, the indigenous people are Black. They are known as negritos. They look like me. If you are considered Black, they look like you. Okay. But in Asian films, the representation of the continents of who is in the film is white people, or the Asians that are light, bright, almost white. In South America, well, we already know, if you're American, you know for sure. the films there are going to posture or favor the South Americans who are either European or South Americans who look light, bright, almost white. And what I mean by European, because there's different types of Europeans, even in European films, there's different types of Europeans. The indigenous Europeans are black. They look like me and they look like you if you're black. Now, that's some time ago, and their descendants are somewhat still here. Nonetheless, there are black people also all around the world who live in Europe. And when we look at these European films, who is represented predominantly? Light, bright, almost white, or white Europeans. Now, in North America, in Australia, see, Australia is no disrespect to anybody. This is for educational purposes. Australia is pretty much like the little brother or sister of America. All right. It's the West and the East. And a lot of their movies are going to copy what the West does, because pretty much the colonizers who went there set it up that way, white people. Okay. So how can I say it this way? In Australia and in North America, majority of the films you see, majority of the movies you see are going to showcase and favor white people, white Europeans, white European Americans, or white European descents who are Americans. What I mean by that is white European Americans. Just if someone is triggered, I don't know. In Australia, the Australians, the white people there are from Europe. So they will be white European descendants. So therefore I call them white European Australians. And when we look at their films, what do we see? They all stay lock and step to this. What Ewan Kirkland is writing about in Whiteness, Vampires and Humanity in Contemporary Film and Television. Basing his information off of research done by Richard Dyer in 1997, a study entitled White. Okay, so let's switch gears here. I know I'm a little corny, but I'm dealing with it. All right, so let's switch gears here. And now let's address what blackness is. So now we're beginning a whole new class. So now, let me restart. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cafe Wish Podcast in the Classroom. I'm your host, Kevin Black. And today's topic, we're going to address blackness. Let's begin. Now, let me look up what blackness is. Let's get a working definition. Okay, let's see what blackness is. Okay, so this definition of blackness is coming from Cambridge Dictionary. So, dictionarycambridge.org. The term, the word, is blackness? Okay. Blackness is a noun. The quality of being very dark or an area of darkness. All right, let's see if we can find another definition for blackness. Here's another definition from Merriam-Webster. Blackness has three main meanings. The first meaning is the state of being completely dark.